Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Cote. I proudly serve on the executive board of the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region. A couple of things I'd like to check on before we really kick things off. One thing is I'm involved with the Second Century Corporation, City of Pasadena. The City of Pasadena and Second Century went through an endeavor to make sure we had a robust Wi-Fi system here today for your event. And by a round of applause, how is the Wi-Fi for everybody that's been able to use it? Has it been good? Anybody? I mean, that's not the most encouraging applause that I've ever heard. Okay, so let me share with you guys something that's important to understand about the Economic Alliance. And that is they're very diligent and they're very strategic in what they do. And so the committee putting together this event essentially said, okay, we're going to have two days of people talking, a lot of things going on, a lot of interaction, and a lot of food being served. And so the second day was a very important day because they said at 12:30, after everybody eats, everybody's going to be sleepy. They're going to be tired. So the committee said, we need the most dynamic speaker in the state of Texas to come up and speak to this group so that everybody is attentive and aware of what's going on, especially as it relates to the industry of oil and gas. And so for those of you that have attended this event, know what I'm talking about over the last couple of years, right? Those of you that are new to this event and have never heard our commissioner speak, you're in for a treat. So let me tell you a couple of things about Ryan Christopher Sitton. He grew up in Irving, Texas. His parents were both high school teachers, so Ryan likes math. He likes math and science very well. But an interesting thing about Ryan is that in high school, he was also a DJ. So I'm thinking, you know, a DJ probably into techno music, probably counting the beats and doing some mathematical equation to kind of figure out what was his favorite song and why. But anyways, with that math and that science, he went on to Texas A&M University and graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. And he went out into the energy sector. And with that, he worked with companies like Alcoa, Oxy, and Marathon. But in 2006, him and his wife, Jennifer, who also is a mechanical engineer from Texas A&M, founded Pinnacle ART, which is an engineering company, an engineering and technology company focused on reliability and integrity programs for the oil and gas and petrochemical industry. Pinnacle today has over 700 employees, and they're located right here in Pasadena. Pinnacle also is rated one of the top fastest growing privately held companies, not in just Houston, not in just the state of Texas, but the entire United States. They've also been a recipient the last few years for the Aggie 100 and that specific honor. Now, regarding Ryan, he was sworn in to office January 2015 as a Texas Railroad Commissioner. And please, if you get a chance to talk to him, ask him about the trains. He loves talking about the trains as regards. Rumor also has it that he personally owns about 100,000 Legos that his kids are not allowed to play with because, quite frankly, they've kind of grown out of it, except for Ryan. But anyways, Ryan had been appointed to the Texas A&M Mechanical Engineering Council. They are a member of the Texas Alliance of Energy Producers, members of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, American Petroleum Institute, and he is a member of the Conservative Citizens Club of Pasadena. Ryan is married to his beautiful bride, Jennifer, and they've got 3 kids, Sarah, Luke, and Lance. And with that, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Ryan Sitton.
Thanks, Steve. That was a good one. Howdy. Did anybody pick up on the fact that when Steve said the words, the most dynamic speaker in Texas, that this ominous thunder occurred? I was like, come on, Steve, don't call down the wrath. Steve's very flattering. I appreciate that introduction. It is really good to be back with you again this year. I had the good fortune to speak to you 2 years ago, 2015, last year, 2016, and back again in 2017. And each year, I've been bold to make a few predictions. I'll hit on one of them I made last year again this year, and I'll talk about some predictions for next year. For those who don't know, Steve mentioned that both of my parents are teachers. And I'll give you a little more background. My dad taught physics in public school in Texas for 44 years. Just retired 2 years ago. My mom, thank you. My mom, that's more applause than the Wi-Fi got. My mom taught chemistry in high school in Texas for 36 years. So between the two of them, thank you, between the two of them, 80 years of teaching high school science in the state of Texas. Do you know what that means? I am a huge dork. Which is why I like to talk at this conference. This conference gives us an opportunity. It gives us an opportunity to blend a couple of things. We can certainly talk about economics, economic outlook. We can talk about what's happening in our region. But we also, and I get a chance to throw in some numbers, talk about some statistics that are really important to what's happening in the world around us. The one prediction I want to talk about that I made last year, if you remember. Just curious, anybody take notes on my predictions last year? Dang it. Okay, I can't lie. If you paid attention last year, I said I thought oil prices were going to, sometime this year, return to $60 a barrel. That's the one prediction I wanted to go back to because obviously I was wrong. I want to talk about why that happened, and we'll come back to this in a minute. I want to talk about what that means in terms of our state, our national, but also just our regional economy. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit on a personal level, philosophical level. We just had with Hurricane Harvey what will likely be the largest economic disaster in human history. In other words, no disaster, no natural disaster has occurred that will have a bigger economic impact, will cost more dollars than Hurricane Harvey. We're hearing estimates now in the $2, maybe even $300 billion range. Prior to this, Hurricane Sandy up in the New England area was tipping the scales at like $120 billion. But because of the massive geographic footprint of Harvey, the number of people who had everything from homes and cars flooded to their jobs shut down to just simply couldn't produce out of a factory or couldn't even get to work, all of that impact is going to eclipse anything we've ever seen before. The question that we have gotten a lot, and I mean me as a railroad commissioner and certainly in the oil and gas industry, is when we look at this industry and our ports and our pipelines. I've got this question on Neil Cavuto. He says, Ryan, do you think that stuff was correctly placed? Hindsight being 2020, is that where you build all of that infrastructure? And I quickly answered him, absolutely. We'll explain some numbers in a minute, but absolutely that's where you build it. But before I talk about the numbers, let me talk a little personally. Before I do, how many of us live in the Houston region? So almost all of us. If you don't live in this area, if you weren't personally here through Harvey, let me tell you, and I'm going to get a little prideful. My Texas pride's going to show up. Man, if you could have been here and seen how everybody whose home was affected had volunteers coming out of the woodwork to tear out sheetrock, tear out insulation, go help move furniture. Even when the hurricane was going on, did you know that in Harris County, in the Houston area, there were more people rescued by private vehicle and private boat than rescued by government? It's a proud time to be a Houstonian or a Houston area person and to be a Texan. To see that kind of willpower, to say, look, I'm not just going to sit here, I'm going to go out and help somebody. If my home wasn't affected, I'm going to go out and help somebody. A couple days after the whole thing had passed, I was working in a house in Friendswood, which is where I live. And we were in this home, and I was working next to a guy I'd never met before, in a home who I didn't know, with a church group that I had never met. And this guy I'm working with, he'd only been in Texas about 3 years, and he was from Boston. We go outside to take a break, we're drinking a Gatorade, and I was talking about where he's from, and I said, he talked about prior hurricanes because I've been here through Ike. And I said, this is kind of the way it works. I mean, we pull up our bootstraps, we get out there and get it done. I said, I don't know if that's a Texas thing or if it's an American thing. And the thick Boston accent that I won't insult by trying to imitate. He says, I think it's a Texas thing. He says, I've been here 3 years. In the 3 years I've been here, I got to a point where after the rains were gone, if your home was okay and you weren't out helping someone, you must be some sort of sociopath. He said, that's the culture of this area. So when you think about what happens in our industry, and we'll talk numbers, as I said, in a minute, that will, that drive to get things done, it perseveres. And it's very consistent with what I've learned in my 20 years in the oil business. But I'll tell you just a personal experience that I love. And I'll before I talk about the fact that I remember something in Ike. When we went through Ike, and those of you who were here during Ike, you remember the power was out a lot more places. Rains had not only flooded the streets, but the winds were bad enough that power lines were out. And one guy who was particularly negatively affected was on the radio a few days afterward. And he made a really interesting statement that has stuck with me the rest of my life. He said, whoever he was interviewing with, I don't remember. He said, sometimes I think natural disasters are God's way of reminding us what's really important. That really stuck with me. A few days after, in fact, it was Labor Day. Labor Day, I was in Houston. I had gone to Austin because there was this little gas shortage thing that you were hearing about around the state. Being a railroad commissioner, I was trying to go out and advise the people of the state how much gasoline we actually have in storage. The fact that there wasn't a gasoline storage. We'll talk more about that in a minute too. But Monday, Labor Day, I had headed back into town. I was driving a railroad commission truck because I'd brought supplies down. I was coming in to try to help as many people as I could back from Austin. Monday, Labor Day, I was driving out, and I'd been all around the areas of Friendswood and down into Dickinson, whose 90% of their homes were affected. I hadn't been to Pasadena yet. Hadn't even been in my office yet. So I drove by the office and was out looking around some houses, and I stopped at a house. Driving through right over here in one of the little smaller areas in Pasadena. I stop at a house, and I ended up getting to meet a couple named Jenny and Fred. Now, I go up to their house, and Jenny and Fred and one of their little cousins was there, but nobody else. And they were working, and it was obvious Fred was worn out. Jenny, Fred, probably in their mid-50s. Fred was exhausted, been working in his house for a few days. He told me he didn't have flood insurance. I said, well, how are you doing? You doing okay? Well, we've got some wood floors still in the house. We weren't able to get out. A church group was here, but they had to bail and go home. They were worn out. Well, I had my tools in my truck. So I said, well, tell you what, why don't I finish up? So I grabbed my shovel and my crowbar and my sledgehammer, and I get in there, and at first I thought, I'm doing some good, but I think Fred was like, man, I was ready to stop for the day. But being a good Texan, he thought, I can't let this guy work back there by himself, so he was out there. But man, I was fresh. I'd been out looking around. I'd been kind of doing office work. I was ready to get it. It's probably 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Man, the wood floors were flying out of that room. I'm wham, boom, pulling them out. They're dragging them out. Great people, great to meet. People I would have never met. Never had a chance to meet these people. I get done with the wood floors, remove a little more sheetrock, sweet as can be, and they're like, okay. And I said, man, is there anything else I can do? Well, I guess we could pull the cabinets out. Let's get it. And I'm just ready to go. But what's cool was that I was the only person there. The church groups had gone. It was just neat to get to meet Jenny and Fred. And then the whole thing, they're looking out and they see my truck out there. It says Texas Railroad Commission. They said, do you work for the Texas Railroad Commission? Yes. Yes, that's what I do. I work for the Railroad Commission. Does the Railroad Commission do this stuff? Yes. Yes, we do. Got really funny when they said, hey, what about the high-speed rail from Houston to Dallas? Are you ever going to put that in? No. It got really fun. I was waiting. Toward the end of the time I was there, and they were asking a little bit more about what I did for the Railroad Commission. I just had to come clean. I said, well, I'm actually an elected official. And then they were like, what? So I explained, I'm a railroad commissioner. We said this, and after it sunk in for a while, they were like, man, you guys really serve, don't you? And Fred got excited. He's like, hang on just a minute. He runs out to the pile, and he gets like a piece of the wood floor that I'd torn out. He goes, man, would you sign this? Absolutely. Ryan Sitton. If you hold on to that for like 5 years, it'll be worth nothing. Just a great experience to meet people. And the reason that was nothing exceptional. I guarantee if I had a show of hands here, everybody here was doing something. Everybody was working in somebody's house, if it wasn't their own. They were out helping a church group. They were donating money. This area inspired everybody. As we ask the questions, well, what's the future of the oil and gas industry? Not just for this area, not just after Harvey, but I'm talking generationally. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. Such a great example of the type of people who live in the greater Houston, Pasadena, Harris County area. This is how we work. This is how we live. Everyone around here is either in the oil and gas business or they know somebody, personally related to somebody in the oil and gas business. That's petrochemicals, pipelines, midstream, you name it. And that can-do attitude, it reeks when you go into a refinery. You can smell the effort. You can smell the will. Am I losing? Wow. It's getting serious now. You can smell this with people. You can sense it. So let's talk about what's happening. Last year I predicted that I thought this year we'd see $60 a barrel for oil. And I think today we're right around 50. So someone who was asking probing questions may say, well, Ryan, what happened? Where did those 60, we could really use those $60 a barrel. What happened? Well, as it turns out, oil prices, you might remember me saying this last year, oil prices are not dictated by supply and demand. I know. In fact, I see a couple people go, wait a minute, what? I learned that in college, supply and demand. Oil prices are driven by what a bunch of contractors or energy traders think supply and demand is going to do in the future. In other words, if you're purchasing oil futures or you're selling oil futures, you're basing your decision on what price based on where you think supply and demand will be in the future state. Well, as we've been going through the supply and demand exchanges, if you look over the last 6 years, when you saw in 2013, 2014, when oil prices were high, the world was in a shortage. There was less oil being produced than what was being consumed. In 2015, that began to switch. Through 2016, we had a pretty good glut. 1.5 to 2 million barrels a day of excess oil production. That gap has closed. In fact, all the forecasts are that as we look at 2017, the back half of it, even in 2018, we probably are fairly close, even a little undersupplied. Well, Ryan, if you can look 12 months down the road and say that you think those gaps have closed, why is it oil prices aren't closer? Why aren't they going up if you thought they were before? Turns out a couple things have happened. First of all, the cost to produce oil in the United States in the last 12 months has actually come down quite a bit, especially in the Permian Basin. If you were to go into places like the Permian Basin, you asked them, hey, in say 2014, what does it cost on average to pull a barrel of oil out of the ground, even calculating return on capital? You'd have heard numbers like $60 a barrel, maybe $55. If you're really good, maybe $50. You see, in the United States, when the price of oil goes below where you can produce it, what do? Stop producing. If you're an international government, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, even in Canada, where you have private companies but government-owned minerals, in most other places around the world, these minerals are not owned by private companies. In fact, did you know the United States is the only country in the world where a private individual can own minerals? When you look around the world, all these countries are saying, you know what, we'll just stay this out because it's a jobs program. If I start shutting down oil production, I'll have all these people out of work. What do? I've got to give them welfare. I might as well have them producing oil at a loss rather than sitting on the dole and producing nothing. So countries today are trying to battle through, hey, if oil prices are going to come up, can we stay the course? Can we keep our companies built? Mexico is a very good example of this. Here we have 6 refineries in Mexico. Lose money every single year. They run it anywhere between 65 and 70% of their availability. Right across the border in the United States, our refining infrastructure makes money almost every single year, sometimes slim, but in general makes money, and they run at closer to 95% availability. How is it that in Mexico, just across the border, their refineries lose money and run at such a low reliability? Right up north, ours do better, because our guys are in the free market system. Over the last 30 years, from 1980 to today, half of the refineries in the country have gone out of business. There were 300 refineries in the United States in 1980. Today, there's less than 150. The ones that couldn't compete were shut down. The other ones expanded. The 140 that are left in the country today refine almost as much crude oil as the 300 did in 1980. Mexico doesn't work that way. It's a jobs program. So the other thing that has kept oil prices low are all the national oil companies who are continuing to put oil and gasoline on the market even though they are doing it at a loss. So I get to what's my bold prediction for next year. I'm going to double down. I think next year we're going to see $60 a barrel. And the reason I think that is most of the countries who cannot produce oil economically, who cannot run a refinery economically, are going to decide slowly but surely to get out of that business. They're going to say, you know what? We can keep losing money on this. But why don't we just buy that stuff from the Americans? They do it cheaper, they do it better, they do it cleaner than anybody else. Which brings me to a point I want to talk about specific to this conference today, our ports. Over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of interesting discussion around port expansion. Port of Houston, Port of Beaumont, Port of Corpus Christi, you name it. All of the Gulf ports have looked at expanding. And you ask ourselves, what has that changed? Absolutely. Let's use Port of Corpus Christi as an example. Corpus Christi had a project on the books for over 20 years. 20 years. They had asked Congress to expand the Port of Corpus Christi. Now you may say, well, Ryan, we're at the Port of Houston. You get that, right? Yeah, I get that. But this same logic affects all the ports. The Port of Corpus Christi has one of specific focus. Port of Corpus Christi had requested government funds, federal government funds, to expand their port, to dredge their port deeper and widen it. And for 20 years, it couldn't get approved. The Army Corps of Engineers couldn't fit it in their budget. 2 years ago, though, something changed. The U.S. lifted its crude export ban. When the United States lifted the crude export ban, you have all of this Eagle Ford and Permian and even North Dakota and Oklahoma and New Mexican crudes that somehow need to get to market. With all those crudes trying to find a place to send them, Corpus Christi is actually a very good place to do that. Maybe not for every product, but for crude oil specifically, it's in good proximity to the Eagle Ford, and the area around Corpus Christi is not near as developed as it is, say, around Houston. You don't have to cut through a bunch of cities and towns and infrastructure. So now all of a sudden we're looking at Corpus Christi with a different look. You know what? If we expand that port, we could export 3 million barrels a day of crude oil out of the state of Texas. How big a deal is that? Today, the Port of Corpus Christi exports more oil than all of the other ports in the United States combined. Corpus Christi exports more than half of the oil that all of the United States exports, and they can do about 1 million barrels a day today. They generally don't do that much, but that's their capacity. As our production grows in this state, and they want to export more, let's say they get to 3 million barrels a day. 3 million barrels a day at a $50 a barrel crude is $50 million a day in export. Now, granted, we don't get to keep all that. Some of that is cost in developing that crude. Here's how I like to look at it. If you look at some of the cheaper crudes that you can buy from any other area around the world, the heavy sour stuff that you can buy from Mexico or Canada, some of those crudes trade at a $10 to $15 a barrel discount. So if I export 3 million barrels a day of our light sweet crude, and we say buy 3 million barrels a day of heavy sour crude from Canada, refine that in our infrastructure, that trade advantage at even $10 a day for 3 million barrels, that's $30 million in trade advantage just from selling our crudes overseas and bringing more into Texas from other places. The ports are where the new action is going to come. The world today is moving in a different direction. The world is saying, we need energy. The United States energy growth actually is relatively stagnant. Did you know that the per capita energy growth in the United States is actually going down? We as a people individually use less energy today than we did 2 years ago. However, other places around the world, Asia, Middle East, even in Russia, most countries are growing their per capita energy usage, plus they're growing their population. The world is demanding more and more energy. When I spoke to you last year, I talked about the fact that from 2006 to 2016, the crude oil demand in the world went from about 85 million barrels a day to about 96 million barrels a day. Grew by roughly 1%, a little bit more than that, 1.1% over that time, or about 1 million barrels a day per year. Right now, they're forecasting for the next 5 years it's going to grow closer to 1.5, maybe even 2 million barrels a day, as countries like Pakistan and India really begin to consume all of this crude oil. Already the state of Texas has been great at filling that gap and putting more crude oil on the market. And that's why I think, lastly, that next year we're going to see $60 a barrel. The world continues to use more oil. The United States is producing it cheaper than anybody else, and more countries who can't do it at $50 or $45 a barrel are going to slow down their production. I think next year we see 60. I want to shift gears, though, and talk about something else, especially when we talk about ports. You look around and you say, well, Ryan, you're talking about all these countries growing their energy usage. Is it all crude oil? No. In fact, even though crude oil consumption has grown at a pretty nice pace, 1.1, maybe in the future 2% per year, it is being eclipsed by the growth in natural gas. In 2006, the world used about 300 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas. Today, the world's using over 360 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas. While crude oil consumption grew by 1% roughly a year, natural gas, on average over 10 years, grew by 2%, and it's grown at a higher pace in the last few years. It's growing at even 3% some years. The reason is places like Mexico and China and others who are building their electricity grids need natural gas. Of the 360 billion cubic feet a day that the world uses of natural gas right now, the United States produces around 80 billion cubic feet of that. Roughly 1/4 of the world's natural gas is produced in the United States. And of that 80, 20 billion cubic feet of it are produced right here in Texas. Of the 80 billion that we produce in the United States and the 20 billion that's produced right here in Texas, 10 billion cubic feet of it go to Mexico. Mexico's buying over 1/10 of the natural gas that we produce in this country. That's big. That's real big. And they want more. I was with Mexican officials just earlier this week, and they were talking about how they want to double their natural gas consumption to build additional electricity infrastructure. And they have very little natural gas to use. The natural partner, the natural country to fill that gap is the United States. It doesn't stop there, though. You look around the world, even small places like the Caribbean, Europe, who buys nearly half their natural gas from Russia. Look at places like China, who is so hungry for natural gas, they are outstripping the Australians' ability to fill that market. When you look 5, 10, 15 years down the road, we will continue to be an oil and gas leader, for sure. Our gasoline, our refining capacity, all those things are eclipsing the world. But natural gas is an opportunity to take the world by storm. But in order to do that, we have one big thing we have to do. We have to get it to those markets. If you looked around the world right now and you said, well, hey, in the United States, we're paying roughly $3 a BTU for natural gas, $3 an MSCF for natural gas. What's the rest of the world paying? Europe's paying about 5. I think Japan's paying about 7, 6 or 7. Yeah, they'd love to have $3 gas. They'd kill for it. The problem is, for me to get that natural gas from the port of Houston around to Japan, it costs me $3 or $4 a BTU to do it. So if I'm selling it here at $3 and I add $4, that's $7. That's the same price Japan's paying. Some people say it's even $5 a BTU. But there are projects right now to expand and buy new and construct new, more sophisticated tankers, large-scale ones that will fit into our ports if we expand them, and to lower that cost of moving gas from $4 or $5 a BTU to maybe as cheap as $2 a BTU. Imagine if the world price for gas is $7 a BTU and we can produce it at $2. Even if you include a $2 transportation cost, that's adding $3 of bottom line profit to our natural gas industry. One last thing on natural gas. How much natural gas is there in the United States? If I look at all the reserves, talked about this last year, all the reserves in the United States when it comes to natural gas, we have about 100 years of natural gas in the United States if we only produce at the current rate. Yeah, if we increase production, is there a chance that that number could get lower? Yes, but we are discovering new reserves of natural gas faster than we're developing them. The world, and specifically the United States, is awash in natural gas. Our ability to produce it cheaper, move it via pipeline, get it into an export facility, and move it into some sort of shipping vehicle is what's eclipsing everybody else. I want to come back to one story real quick and talk about the way the world views oil and gas, and why I talk about all this geeky stuff with you. In the hurricane, it was about Wednesday after the hurricane had come through, we didn't hear as much about it in Houston because we were really focused on rebuilding and flooding and everything else. But in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, Corpus Christi, you name it, there were gas panics. Did anybody actually park and wait in line for 10, 15, 20 cars to buy gasoline? So it didn't happen here much. It was really interesting. The one area that was really hit by the hurricane, we didn't see it. Well, how was it, Ryan, that there were people standing in line for gasoline in Dallas and their gas stations were all out of gas and there was what was going on? I mean, we were the ones who were hit. Trucks couldn't even get to gas stations for weeks. Tell you why. Panic. Yes, there were some logistical issues getting gasoline to gas stations in Dallas, certainly. But those could have been overcome with some sophisticated moves by our refiners, Valero, Exxon, Chevron, these guys working together to move product around. The problem was social media went rampant. I started getting calls Tuesday after the hurricane came through, said, Ryan, have you heard about what's happening in South Texas? No, what's happening? People are running there's runs on gas stations. Like the old movie, It's a Wonderful Life, when there's a run on the bank. Same thing. Everyone went to the gas station. You got to get gas. So I had to get to Austin so I could go on television and tell people and say, hey, listen, the state of Texas uses about 1 million barrels a day of gasoline. We've got 230 million barrels of gasoline in storage in the country right now. There's still 2 million barrels a day of gasoline being refined every day right now. Don't panic. You know who believed me? Nobody. Because clearly, a statewide elected engineer dork doesn't know as much as my sister-in-law, who said on Facebook, there's a gas shortage. It was striking. We started getting pictures flooding into our office of people pulling up. I saw this one picture. Guys pulling up. Anybody ever worked on a farm and they got these pickup trucks? In the back of a pickup truck, there's these gigantic water things like a translucent deal, holds like 300 gallons of water for going around water truck. I saw a picture of a guy at a gas station filling that thing up. Now, aside from the fact that you're spending a ton of money on gasoline, it's all going to go bad. Think about if he gets in a wreck. That's a bomb going down the street. I mean, people's mind. And now look, let's be really, if you started thinking that there wasn't going to be enough energy, that would cause us all to panic, right? I mean, you can feel that. If I can't get to work, can't get my kids to school, can't get to the grocery store, I understand where the panic comes from. But the fact was we had plenty of gasoline. And we did get a lot of positive feedback on trying to get that message out. The reason I use that as an example, and we watch people stand in line and runs on gas stations, the gas stations ran out, because even if there hadn't been a hurricane, if everybody decides right now today, I've got to fill up every car I own, even my daughter's car that doesn't even drive, and I have to put some gasoline in this Igloo water cooler and in this trash can and in this gigantic. If we do that today, even with no hurricane, the gas station will run out of gas. They're very predictable in terms of, hey, we all fill up on average every 9 days. If we all do it today, there's not enough. What I learned about this, what reminded me, is those of us in this industry have knowledge that most people in this country don't have. Most people hear a bunch of refineries are shut down along the coast. We're going to run out of gas, and they think that makes total sense. Well, we have to remind people when we talk about the energy industry. Yeah, some dork can get up here and spew a bunch of numbers about natural gas or talk about crude oil production and where the world is going. But the opportunities in energy today for our country and for our state are bigger than they have been since before I was born. You have to go back to the 40s and the 50s to find a time in history when the United States had the ability to almost singularly, almost independently control energy markets. We're not there yet, but if we play our cards right over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we will absolutely be there. We'll be at a point that when people talk about the cost of energy, or the way energy is produced, or the way energy is consumed, that despite the fact that they don't have to listen to us, they will. That they will look at the United States and say, that's the way you do energy. They'll want to partner with us to leverage our ability to produce and develop our natural resources. And think about what this means environmentally. You know, people would say, oh, Ryan, you're a statewide elected Republican. You must think all environmental stuff is crap. No, because I grew up in Texas just like many of you did. My friends, my family, we love the outdoors. That's where we live. We can't. Nothing is more important than protecting the safety of our children, our families, and our communities, our forests, our other natural resources. But I also know that we breathe the same air here that they do in the Middle East. If we develop it cleaner here, then we should do it here. If we do it better than everybody else, think about the leadership role that we play, and that opportunity is in front of us today in a way it has not been since before I was born. To leverage that, we've got to do a good job, not just me, all of us, talking with our neighbors, our friends, our families, sitting down at the dinner table with somebody from your church or your kids' Boy Scout group, your girl's daughter's track team, whatever, talking about how big this opportunity, what it really means, because I think you can't overstate how big this opportunity is. I ended this speech last year the same way I want to end it this year. The reason I get so excited about this stuff, and yeah, it's not the normal thing to get excited about, is because when you think about this opportunity, it's much bigger than Ryan Sitton, much bigger even than Pasadena and the Economic Alliance. This is something that will affect our state and our nation for a generation. And wouldn't we be proud to say that under our watch is when the United States became the global energy powerhouse again? That is a legacy that every single one of us could be proud of. Thank you very much for being with me today. Thank you for letting me serve as your Texas Railroad Commissioner. Have a great day.